Reading books is one of the most important things you can do if you want to continually grow your mind, grow your vision, grow your life. And in this video, I'm going to share with you a ton of books which have been the highest impact books for me that I've ever read. So the first book is Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. She was a Stanford psychologist. And this is the ultimate book on how to think about your future self. So what Carol Dweck did is she broke mindset into two categories. One is a fixed mindset, one is a growth mindset. You've probably heard those things. She's the one that coined it. This book is a deep dive into the difference between those two. One of the big things about the fixed mindset is a fixed mindset person overly emphasizes who they are right now. They overly focus on who I am right now, and they actually overly define their current selves. They say that this is who I am and this is who I'm always going to be, and so they don't imagine a different future self. People with a fixed mindset are very terrified of failure because they have what's called a fragile identity. They don't want to try something and fail because if they fail, then that will overly shatter their view of themselves. They don't want to try something and fail because what that means is that they're just not good enough. Whereas someone with a growth mindset, they know that if they fail, they can ultimately learn through those failures and become someone new. Person with a growth mindset is more focused on imagination, not knowledge. As Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And if you have a growth mindset, you actually seek failure. You fail forward, but you measure backwards. You measure your progress backwards, and you see that you're not the same person you used to be. You can see huge progress between your current self and your former self. As Elaine Day Button said, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. So growth mindset people seek failure. They actually celebrate failure. They celebrate learning, and they know that their future self can be different. And so this book is one of the cornerstone books that you must read if you want to be an active learner and if you want to develop a growth mindset. The next book is The War of Art from Steven Pressfield. This book was the book that actually pushed me, one of the books that pushed me over the edge to finally become a writer. I'd wanted to be a writer for over 5 years and I'd never done it. I read The War of Art and it pushed me to become a writer. And one of the big things that Steven Pressfield talks about in that book is resistance. We all have resistance. If you want to pursue something noble or worthwhile or awesome, whether that be a creative project, something good like having a diet, improving your life, if you want to improve your life or improve the world in any way, you will face what he calls resistance. And this book is the antidote. This book talks about how to overcome that resistance and how to become what he calls a pro. A pro is someone who gets paid for what they do, and it's someone who faces resistance and courageously pursues what they want. You, whatever you do, you're a pro at something if you get paid for your job. The question is that job a form of resistance against what you really want to do? There's a great quote that says, "We're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal." So that was Robert Brault. He said, we're kept from our goal, not by obstacles. It's not the obstacles. That's resistance. Resistance is going to stop you from facing those obstacles. We're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. That's what resistance does. Resistance pushes you to take clear paths to lesser goals. So you may be in a job you hate, but you're actually technically a pro at that because you get paid at it. But if you want to become a pro at what you really want to do, you need to face resistance and start getting paid at your dreams. You need to start living life at your dreams, and you need to face resistance every single day. It takes courage to face resistance. Courage is the doorway to change. Courage is how you transform your life. The next book is one that I don't actually have physically, but it's called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. This is a book that I read like 10 years ago. It's one of the most beautiful, powerful self-improvement books. And basically the main premise of The Compound Effect, it's just like compound interest. If you do things consistently over time, eventually they start to heavily compound. That's exactly what the premise of James Clear's book Atomic Habits is as well. Small things over time eventually become big things. If you invest $100 in the stock market every single day or every single week, but you start doing it over 10, 20, 30 years, eventually the results become exponential. And so habits, behaviors, actions, relationships, all of those things compound over time. And so you really want to get good at the little things. What are the little things that you can do every single day that eventually are going to be huge? That's The Compound Effect. That is a book I highly recommend. You read it, it's a gut punch every single day. One of the things he talks about, just as an example, is 3 friends. He gives a great example of 3 friends, and he says, these 3, you're basically the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, but there's 3 friends. One of them just continues doing what they're doing for the next 12 months. The other friend just adds one negative behavior for the next 12 months. Let's just say he adds an extra 150 calories of junk food. The other friend just adds one behavior for the next 12 months, and that's just to listen to good audios in his car. Rather than listening to talk radio, he switches to listening to audiobooks. Over the next 12 months, just by shifting that one behavior, these people's lives go in radically different directions. Because from a systems perspective, if you change anything, you change everything. If you change a part, you change the whole. And so by adding one negative behavior to his life, it actually created a negative keystone habit where he was doing one thing, but ultimately it rippled into other areas. He started to gain weight. He started to have a bad self-image. It started to reduce his sleep quality. And ultimately, he started to become more cranky at work, more rude at his wife, and it started to create marital conflicts. It's the idea that if you start doing one negative thing and it becomes a habit, it'll actually creep into all the other areas of your life. Whereas the other guy who just started doing one positive thing, that became a positive keystone habit, which rippled into all the other areas of his life. So because he was listening to positive audios or awesome instructional books, he started to think differently. It led him to having more creative ideas at work, ultimately leading him to getting a raise. He had more confidence. He started investing more money into his future self. It's just the idea that the compound effect isn't just one thing. It's when you're doing one thing positively, it's going to ripple into everything else, which creates exponential results. Whereas if you're doing something negative, it's going to create negative compounding results throughout all of the rest of your life. The Compound Effect is an amazing book. Please check it out. The next book is another book that I don't have physically, but it's called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And basically the whole premise of that book is that whatever stands in the way becomes the way. It's a quote from Marcus Aurelius, that the obstacle actually is the way. This harkens to a lot of research in psychology about motivation. There's either approach motivation or there's avoid motivation. A lot of people, they're overly avoid oriented. If they hit an obstacle, they try to avoid it. They try to go around it, or they try to just not deal with it. Whereas if you're an approach-oriented person, you try to go through the obstacle, and you know that going through the obstacle is the fastest way, and you ultimately learn through that obstacle. The obstacle itself transforms you. That goes back to the quote from Robert Brault, that you're not kept from your goal by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. If you're willing to go through those obstacles will actually transform you. Those obstacles are actually the source that you need to transforming. You use those obstacles to become the person you want to be. And they actually create peak experiences. As you face obstacles and learn from them, you become more capable than your former self. You know things your former self didn't know. You realize that the obstacle was much bigger in your head than it is in real life. So as an example, you may see an obstacle of asking your boss for a raise, and you might dread it and make it something big in your head, and then once you finally do it, you realize it wasn't that big of a deal. The obstacle was primarily emotional. That's actually usually the case. Usually the obstacles are just your emotions about the thing, not the thing itself. It's how you're thinking about the thing, it's not the thing itself. Yes, the obstacle may present something challenging to you, but the main reason it's challenging is because you've inflated it in your mind. What psychologists have found is that usually we inflate things 2 to 7 times when we're afraid of loss. The anticipation of an event is almost always more profound or bigger than the event itself. So it's important to realize that the obstacles you're going to face aren't going to be that bad if you just approach them. If you have an approach orientation towards life, it means you're on offense. You're moving forward, you hit the obstacle, you learn from it, you dissect it, you figure it out, you get help. And then you realize it really wasn't that bad, and you've now made it through it, and now you're more flexible, more capable, more confident as a person, and you just keep going, and it builds into momentum where obstacles stop being a thing. So The Obstacle is the Way is a very powerful book, very well written. It's a book I read maybe 5 years ago. I actually read it once while I was running on a track for a few hours, and I kept running because the book was so gripping, and I've recently reread it, and I've recently been re-inspired by it. So check out The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Another amazing book is called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. This is a book all about happiness, success, finances, entrepreneurship. It's a book I've recently read, and it's a book that just upgrades your thinking immediately. So that book, I can't even break down the details because it's still a newer book to me, and it's one that I'm still processing. But he basically just breaks down how to be happy, how to be successful, how to think about money, how to think about leverage. People who make a ton of money, people who invest in companies, people who make billions of dollars, they think about everything in terms of leverage. What's a small action I can take to get an outweighed result? One of the other things that he talks about with happiness is that happiness is an inside game. Life is a one-player game. You're not actually competing with anyone. There's no such thing as external progress, and there's no such thing as external validation. You're the one who determines your happiness, and happiness comes when you finally stop playing in the outside world. You stop playing against other people, and you just realize it's between you and yourself. You get to determine the game you're playing. You get to determine the experience you're having, and as you start to improve your happiness on the inside, you actually start to create exponential results on the outside. The Almanac of Naval Ravikant is a brilliant, brilliant book that will change how you think about business, money, and happiness. Now, when it comes to productivity, there's a few key books. One is Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. This is just such a simple little book, but it packs a huge punch. It basically breaks down most of the big ideas in productivity. Eat the Frog is basically the idea that you want to do the worst first. From Brian Tracy's perspective, people who eat the frog, they get up and they put the important before the urgent, but not only that, they consistently finish those important tasks. The frog is the thing that you would resist doing. That goes back to the war of art, that you're going to have resistance towards going towards your future self. You're going to have resistance towards doing what's important and towards being courageous. Eating the frog means you're putting the important before the urgent. The urgent is your current life, your current circumstances, your current self, whereas what's important is your future self. It's your dreams, your aspirations, your hopes. It's what you truly value and what you believe in. And most people, because they hit resistance, they don't ever do those things that are important. It reminds me of the quote from Meredith Willson, who said, if you wait for too many tomorrows, you'll find that you have a lot of empty yesterdays. That's how a lot of people live. They always are just living based on the urgent. They don't put the important first. And so this book talks about how to put the important first and how to consistently finish. Successful people don't only face resistance and intentionally and courageously engage in eating the frog, but they also complete projects, whether it be that blog post, that book, that product. They're consistently finishing things and they're putting the important before the urgent. And if you live your life this way, eventually you stop dealing with the urgent altogether. You start only doing things that are important. Your standards for what you do increase. You stop being so busy and you start just focusing on impact. As far as actually applying Eat the Frog, what I would challenge you to do is at the end of every single day, decide the 3 things you're going to accomplish the next day, the 3 frogs. It could be 1 frog, 2 frogs, or 3, but don't have more than 3 things on your daily to-do list because that would actually go against the Eat the Frog mentality. If you've got like 10 items on your to-do list, then you're not applying the 80-20 principle. And according to the 80-20 principle, 80% of your results comes from 20% of what you do. And so the frogs are those 20% of things that have huge leverage, huge outweighted results. And that's one of the principles of Eat the Frog is the 80-20 principle, which is do those few things that really matter. Do those few things that have the biggest impact on your future self. So you don't want to have more than 3 items on your to-do list. What are the 1, 2, or 3 frogs you could eat tomorrow morning? And if you wake up and take action on those before the busyness of the day, before all the urgencies, before the day takes on itself, then you will have put the important before the urgent. Then you'll have put your future self before your current situation. You'll have put your future circumstances before your current circumstances, and you'll be building confidence. And if you consistently eat the frog and put those first things first and consistently finish those important projects, success becomes inevitable. The next book is The 4-Hour Workweek, which is basically just a classic on productivity. The main reason I like this book is it teaches you to question essentially everything you're doing. It forces you to focus on the 80-20. The 80-20 is one of the core principles in the 4-Hour Workweek. And again, 80% of your results comes from 20% of what you do. And so if you just completely cut out the 80% of activities you're doing that are only producing 20% of your results, and you just focus on the few things that produce results, then you really don't need to work that much. Tim Ferriss also talks a lot about delegation, automation, just setting systems in place so that you no longer even have to be involved. It reminds me a lot of this book right here, Who Not How, which is a book I actually wrote with Dan Sullivan, which is that you only want to focus on the few things that you want to do and the few things that have the biggest impact. Then you either want to eliminate, delegate, or automate everything else. You essentially want to just create systems so that you no longer have to be involved. And so creating a 4-hour work week isn't actually that impossible. And if you start having multiple streams of income, then you might have to put like 2 or 3 hours a month into one stream of income, but that stream of income might produce 6 figures a year or 6 figures a month even potentially. So creating a 4-hour work week is indeed possible. It's not necessarily the goal because if you actually love what you're doing, then you should be fine working more. But why I like the book is because it just challenges you to stop doing almost everything you're doing. Focus purely on what you want to do. Focus on purely what actually has a big impact, and then get rid of the rest. Who, not how. Apply who, not how. Delegate, automate, outsource, remove. Another classic productivity book is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. This book just invites you, similarly to the other books, to focus on what's purely essential in your life. In order to focus on what's essential, you have to define what's essential. What truly matters to you? This helps you stay out of the FOMO game. Being in the FOMO game and playing other people's games is really what stops most people from just taking action on what matters most. If you've defined your own game, if you've defined what matters to you, then you don't have to worry about what everyone else is doing. You don't have to worry about what's on Instagram. You don't have to worry about what other people are doing. You don't even have to worry about what your competition is doing because you're no longer competing with them. You're just doing what's essential. And this whole book is basically about, first off, defining what's essential and then removing everything in your life that's non-essential. Removing the situations, the people, the obligations, the commitments. Learning to say no much easier. As Derek Sivers said, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. You start to get to the point where you just, if it's not something you're serious about, if it's not something you're excited about, you just say no to it. And you become comfortable saying no to it, and you become excited about saying no to it. It's no longer the fear of missing out. It's actually the joy of missing out because you know that everything else is just a confusion. That then goes back to the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is that success is an inside game. Happiness is an inside game. It comes from defining your own values, defining your own success criteria, defining what you want, and not worrying about what other people are doing. Ryan Holiday has actually talked a lot about this, that you shouldn't judge yourself based on other people's metrics of success. Forget their metrics of success. You have to define success for yourself. You have to define what's essential for you. You have to define what you believe in. And then once you've defined that for yourself, you ignore everything else. You ignore what other people are doing. You ignore what other people tell you should want. You just live your own life. You play your own game. And that's how you can have integrity within yourself. That's how you can be happy. That's also how you can be extremely productive because now you're no longer a ping pong ball bouncing in different directions based on what other people are doing, but you're actually just taking 20 steps in one direction rather than one step in 20 different directions. So now I'll share a few books about entrepreneurship that have really helped me. One is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is a billionaire. He was involved in creating PayPal with Elon Musk. He also created Palantir. So this book is basically just a series of mental models and thinking tools that changes how you see things. One of them is this matrix right here, which is the difference between definite optimism, indefinite optimism, definite pessimism, and indefinite pessimism. He uses different countries as examples for these different mindsets. So this was very useful. So he talks about how America used to be a definitely optimistic culture. Definite optimism means that you believe the future is going to be better and you have definite plans for getting there. You know that it's definite. He then talks about indefinite optimism, which is destructive, which means that you actually believe the future is going to be better. You're optimistic about the future, but you have no idea how that's going to happen. You don't have concrete plans. You don't know. You're just indefinite about it. You just think it's going to happen, but you don't know how. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you've got definite pessimism. And what Peter Thiel uses as that example is China. Whether you agree with him or not, that's all right. But Thiel says that China is a definitely pessimistic future. Even though they present themselves as optimistic, he says that they know that the future is not going to be better for them, and they know why. So they're definitely pessimistic, even though maybe from a leadership standpoint, they might not tell their people about that. They know that they're never going to be able to be like America. That's, again, Peter Thiel's perspective. The other one is indefinite pessimism, which is what he would rank most of Europe as. Most Europeans, from Peter Thiel's perspective, believe that the future is going to be worse. They just don't know how or in what way. So they're indefinite about that pessimism, but they're pessimistic. They don't think that the future is going to be better. From a psychological standpoint, hope is really important. Hope is one of the fundamentals of having positive well-being. And so hope and optimism are very similar. Hope is actually a form of definite optimism because optimism means that you believe the future is going to be better. That's part of hope, but another part of hope is that you have a pathway to getting there. So you're more definite. You not only know the future is going to be better or you believe the future is going to be better, but you know why. And you see a path to getting there, and so you're definite about it. You're like, yes, this is what we're doing. We're serious about that. We're going to the moon. Here's how we're getting there. So in order to have true hope, you have to have an optimistic future, a specific future, but you also have to see a path to getting there, and you've got to be committed to that path. So 0 to 1 is just an absolutely amazing book. I highly recommend it if you want to upgrade your thinking and if you want to think in terms of principles, first principles. Another book is The Icarus Deception by Seth Godin. This is another one of those books that finally pushed me over the edge of no longer waiting. This is, in my opinion, Seth Godin's best book. Seth Godin's written like 20 books on marketing, on entrepreneurship, on writing. But The Icarus Deception is just all about, well, it's the story of Icarus. The Icarus flew too high, and because of that, he melted his wings and fell and died. What Seth Godin talks about is that that's not actually the story. The story is that there was water below Icarus, and there was fire up above, or there was the sun, and Icarus was trying to not go too high or too low, and that ended up actually being his downfall. And so the book is actually inviting you to see how high you're willing to go, to be way more courageous, to do what you want to do, to essentially face the resistance. That's what Seth Godin is telling you to do, is purely face the resistance. Be as courageous as you can be. He said that art isn't just creating things, it's about being honest in all ways. And the more honest you are, the more courageous you are, the higher you're willing to fly, the more you're willing to live. And so that book is just a raw, real invitation for you to see how high you can fly as a person, to see how courageous you can truly be, to see how much of resistance you're willing to face. And if you're willing to do that, then you ultimately become purely psychologically flexible. You become purely self-determined. You have an enormous amount of peak experiences. You have peak experiences by being courageous. As Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said, a mind that is stretched by new experience can never go back to its former dimensions. So if you're going to fly high, if you're going to not be afraid to fall, if you're going to be courageous, you're going to have a lot of peak experiences, which are going to expand you. You're going to become a lot more adaptive, a lot more psychologically flexible, a lot more confident, and ultimately self-actualized, as Abraham Maslow would frame it. Another really great book is this one, The Power of Starting Something Stupid by Richie Norton. This one fits into the same category of The War of Art and The Icarus Deception. The Power of Starting Something Stupid by Richie Norton is basically the idea that the thing that you think is a stupid idea is probably the smartest thing you can do. A lot of people, they don't pursue that dumb idea, whether it's start that company, write that book, run that marathon, do that bucket list, because it's just a stupid idea. And this book is basically an invitation to start living now as boldly, courageously, and authentically as you can. One of the things that makes Richie Norton different is he's been through a huge amount of tragedy in his life. His wife's brother was 21 years old and just randomly died in his sleep. And then Richie and Natalie, his wife, named their son after that brother, Gavin, and that son, Gavin, died. And then a few years later, Natalie, Richie's wife, had a stroke, literally in her mid-30s, and lost her memory. And Richie wasn't sure if he was going to have a vegetable for a wife. Miraculously, she came back. That same year, they lost their 3 foster kids who they had had for a long time. They thought they were going to adopt. About a year after that stroke, their 10-year-old son got hit by a car and was in a coma for a few weeks. They weren't sure if he was going to live or be a vegetable. So Richie has been through so much tragedy and trauma in his life that he just now has an extreme sense of urgency. He believes that today is my everything. He believes that right now it's now or never. It's like the quote that freedom is now or never. And so this book just teaches you to live today. To live today, to live your dreams today, to face that resistance, to see how you can fly, to not wait, to have an approach orientation towards life, not an avoid orientation towards life. I actually, back in 2014, I read this book for the first time, and I read it 2 times in a row, and that's what pushed me. That, The War of Art, The Icarus Deception, those 3 books are the ones that finally pushed me to just start living my dreams, purely and intentionally, and then to create that state of freedom that I wanted. And so those are killer books. Now we're moving on to books that are very transformational. The first one is by Ellen Langer. Ellen Langer is a Harvard psychologist. She is absolutely amazing. She wrote a book called Counterclockwise. Counterclockwise, and also her book Mindfulness. She is the godmother, I guess you could call it, on the research on mindfulness. She's been studying mindfulness for decades. And so Mindfulness and Counterclockwise are 2 books that just completely change your view of everything. They help you see context. They help you see the power of context. And in Counterclockwise, she talks about how you can anti-age yourself by changing the context. She gives one famous study where she took a bunch of men in their 70s and she put them in an environment that reflected their life 20 years ago. So this was back in the 1970s when they did this study, and these men were in their 70s, and she created an environment that looked more like the 50s. And so she told them to pretend like they were themselves 20 years younger and to not reference anything from the future, but they were only to talk about things in the modern sense, in the current sense of they were 50 years old. And they were there for 2 or 3 days, and these people changed. They literally got younger. They got taller, their fingernails grew. Some of them who were walking in on canes, they could walk out on their own footing. They were also treated differently. The research assistants in the study treated them like human beings rather than old people. And so they changed their environment, they changed their mindset, and it literally changed their biology. And there's a lot of research that Ellen Langer has done on this. She's found that the environments you're in, but also the mindset you have towards your environments changes your biology. And your biology is very flexible. One study, as an example, was that she took women who cleaned out hotel rooms and she broke them into 2 groups. One of the groups, she told the women, hey, the actual work you're doing, cleaning the hotel rooms, going up and down the stairs, all of this actually fits the category of like exercise, and you're actually exercising a ton due to your work. And so I want you to think of everything you're doing, just your normal work activities, as exercise. Well, to the other group, she didn't tell them anything. That was the control group. So they just continued work as normal. And so for the next 4 weeks, one group was framing their work as exercise. All the activities they were doing, the other group just framed their work as work. And 4 weeks later, these women who were in the exercise group, they had complete changes. They had less body fat index. They had a different hip to waist ratio. They literally got fitter, healthier, all just because they framed the same activities as exercise rather than as work. And so your body and your biology is very shaped by how you interpret the events in your life. That's an entire field called epigenetics. And so Ellen Langer's work is absolutely mind-boggling, transformational. Read her book, Counterclockwise. It will teach you how to anti-age. And read her book, Mindfulness. There's another great book called Stumbling Upon Happiness by the Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert. And what Daniel Gilbert talks a lot about in that book is a concept called prospection. That's the idea that as human beings, we're very drawn and driven towards the future. We can't help but imagine the future. And the challenge for most people is that they don't imagine a future much different than the present. What he's found in his research, and he gave a TED Talk on this called The Psychology of Your Future Self, is that most people set their future self up for failure. They don't think about what their future self would want. And so as a result, they engage in behaviors here and now that actually set their future self up for disaster. For example, you're not thinking about what your future self would want, so you don't start investing right now money towards your future self, or you're eating all those donuts, or you're just doing things right now that emphasize your current self's pleasure, but ultimately destroy your future self's happiness. And so the more you can think about your future self and what your future self would want, the more intentional you can become now, the less ignorant you can become now. I actually recently made a video all about Bitcoin and about how a lot of people are now very aware of cryptocurrency, but their former self even knew about it, but their former self wasn't thinking about it. They weren't taking action on it. They didn't think about their future self, or they didn't see the relevance of cryptocurrency. And so what you want to do is, first off, you need to know that your future self is going to be a different person than you. They're going to care about different things than you. They're going to be in a different context, a different situation. Just like right now, you're in a different situation than your former self. Maybe now you're a parent and you're doing certain things, whereas your former self was just a college student partying and stuff. So there's things you care about right now and things you're thinking about right now that your former self wasn't even worried about. They weren't thinking about. Same is true of your future self. And so the question then becomes, what does your future self care about? How can you start living your life to set up your future self for the most success possible? That's when you can start living intentionally. That's when you can start living courageously. That's when you can start living your life by design rather than by default. Stumbling on Happiness is an absolutely clever, hilarious, fun book on happiness. There's another great book that's very transformational called Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart by Gordon Livingston. Gordon Livingston was a grief counselor. He's now passed away. He had gone through so much grief in his own life, but he helped people through grieving. And that book is just a pure book on psychology. It's a small little book, but it teaches you how to get out of your own way. It teaches you how to get out of bad patterns. It teaches you how to change your narrative. It teaches you that your past is flexible. Your past is just a story. Your past is not actually true. It's just a meaning. And you can change your narrative. There may be people in your past that you've vilified. You might have framed your father as a villain, but that same person can be reframed as a hero from a different perspective. And so that book teaches you how you can ultimately reframe the meaning of your past. You can heal your past. And the research on memory is very clear. Memory is just a meaning. It's a perspective. You can change the meaning. You can change your memories. You can change your history of your own self. There's a great book called Time and Psychological Explanation by the psychologist Brent Slife. And he talks about how your memory is always reconstructed in the present. Wherever you're at in the present, that's how you base your memory. That's why your present mood and your future goals alter your views of the past. And so the past is flexible. The past is not fixed. It's not set in stone. It changes. The context changes. The meaning changes. And so I just love the book Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart. It's just a small book filled with wisdom. It's one of those books that you need to read more than one time, but it just changes how you see everything. Another great, very transformational book written by a psychologist is called The Triumphs of Experience by George Vaillant. He's a Harvard psychologist. He was over what was called the 80-year Harvard men's study. So there was a bunch of men back in the 1920s, I believe, 1920s, that were studied. And they were followed. There's about 300 men. And those men were then followed for the next 80, 90 years. And the whole study is just looking at what are the themes of these men? What are the things that relate to happiness or death? And it's just a really crazy book that shows you honestly how to live a good, healthy, happy, successful life based on what's called longitudinal research. This group of men that was followed for 80 years. It shows you how certain events in your 30s and 40s can predict events that happen in your 60s, 70s, and 80s. It shows that you can change your personality at different times in your life. Just because you were a certain way in your 30s doesn't mean you're going to be that same person in your 40s, 50s, or 60s. You can make big changes even late in life. And it really just is a guidepost. It shows you how to avoid a lot of the disasters that most people have in their life. So The Triumphs of Experience, very, very good book. Another amazing book on transformation is Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. This is by Peter Levine. I would also recommend the book The Body Keeps the Score. These are just books on trauma. Peter Levine was a trauma expert, and he studied the somatic side, which is the body side, and about how, your physical body ultimately reflects. It's very similar to The Body Keeps the Score, that your body holds in that trauma, and where you're at physically is a representation more so of where you're at emotionally. And this book just is a powerful way to help you start living your life towards your future self, start aggressively moving forward in your life and healing your trauma. And The Body Keeps the Score is another very important book on trauma. It's probably the seminal book on trauma at this point. And trauma is one of the things that freezes your personality. Trauma is one of the things that keeps you stuck in the past. It's one of the things that keeps you stuck in repetitive cycles. And there are ways to heal trauma. Lots of modalities: mindfulness, yoga, meditation, exercise, counseling. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can heal your trauma, heal your story, free yourself from that energy, heal your body at the same time. So those two books, Waking the Tiger and The Body Keeps the Score, are very important books for freeing yourself from trauma from your past. And when you do that, you then become a lot more healthy, a lot more flexible, a lot more confident, a lot more capable. Then your future becomes more in your hands and you stop being the victim of your past. A similar book on those topics would be this book, Becoming Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza. He also wrote a great book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And the gist of those books is similar, that you don't have to keep living your life on auto, on repeat. You don't have to keep living a predictable life and being the person you were in the past. You can break the habit of being yourself. And your brain is actually unclear of the difference between what you imagine and what you actually are seeing. And so you can start being grateful for things in your future. You can start living out your future. You can start being your future self now, and you can start transforming your circumstances immediately. So Joe Dispenza is a fascinating, amazing author, and I believe that his books can help you let go of the past and become your desired future self faster. Two other huge, amazing books on transformation are Letting Go and Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. The biggest contribution I believe that Hawkins made is his scale of consciousness, where he shows you where you're at on an emotional level. He created a scale that was basically from 0 to 1,000. The sad and crazy part is that Hawkins has done a lot of research on this scale. Again, it goes from 0 to 1,000, and what he's found is that on average, a person will go up only 5 points on the scale in their lifetime. His point is that they only go up a few points because they don't learn from their experiences. We literally have millions and millions of experiences, and yet we fail to learn from them, and so we just repeat our experiences over and over and over again. If you want to go up hundreds of points on this scale, you got to start acting courageously. You've got to face the truth. As Dan Sullivan has said, always make your learning greater than your experiences. You can learn from your experiences, and if you do, then you don't have to repeat them. You can go up the scale. Courage is always the doorway to facing the truth. It's the doorway to facing your past and being willing to reframe it, having hard conversations. So much of people's lives is operating out of fear or anger. That's actually where 80% of the population exists, is between fear and anger. They're either angry about things, or they feel like a victim, or they're just fearful. 80% of the world operates out of fear and anger, and it's why 80% of the population creates negative results in their lives. They're not getting better and better. Courage is the first step. Courage to face the truth. Courage to define your future self. Courage to face the past. Courage to reframe the meaning of the past. Courage to move forward in your life. Courage to face resistance. If you're willing to be courageous, and then if you apply gratitude, love, acceptance, all of those higher level principles on his scale, you can go up hundreds and hundreds of points, even in a short period of time. You can obviously slow boil up hundreds of points, but you can also wormhole multiple points if you're willing to go through fast emotional learning, and if you're willing to become emotionally flexible. So those are some powerful, powerful books. I'm going to just make a few more honorable mentions to just kind of finish up this video. One, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. This is a killer book for anyone who wants to be a creator. I also love just the inside, really artistic. This is just a great book that has the principles. If you want to be a creative person, read that book. Just teaches you that there are no such things as original ideas. All ideas are kind of mashups of other people's ideas, and you can be aggressively creative. Another book, Gap and Gain by Dan Sullivan. This is a book that actually Dan and I are writing together. Dan is an amazing mentor of mine, friend of mine. You can get this book at a link down below. You can actually download this book for free. The Gap and the Gain. Such a beautiful book. Basically, the idea is that most people measure themselves against their ideals, whatever that may be, and that puts them in the gap. Your ideal could be what you think God wants for you. It could be just the ideals of society. It could be just what you wish your life was. If you're always measuring yourself against an ideal, you're always going to be in the gap. You're always going to be unhappy. That creates what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, where you're always trying to get forward. You're always here but wishing you were there. And so instead of measuring the gap and always putting yourself in the gap and always feeling like a loser, no matter how successful you've been, it's much better to measure yourself against the gain. Measuring yourself against your own progress, running your own race. Rather than measuring yourself against externals, you become an internal measurer of yourself. You measure only against yourself and against where you were before. Measuring the gain taps into gratitude, confidence, hope, resilience. It allows you to feel progress no matter where you're at. And there's a lot of research that shows feeling happy first is what leads to success. Feeling progress first is what leads to high performance. A lot of research. One is the broaden and build theory, which basically means you want to feel good first in order to move forward. Why do you think being in the gap would be motivating? Being in the gap is not motivating. Being in the gain is motivating. And also research by BJ Fogg that just shows that feeling good first is what's key to making healthy progress in your life. So Gap and the Gain, beautiful book. Again, you can download it for free below. Susan Jeffers, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways. I think that this really taps into everything we've already talked about courage, about facing resistance. If you want to get your life out of fear and shame, which is where 80% of the population is according to Hawkins, you're going to need to exercise a lot of courage. Courage is probably the power virtue. Courage and gratitude. If you apply both of those on a daily basis, not only will you feel happy, but you'll be moving your life forward. And so Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways is just basically an idea of psychological flexibility. You're going to feel crazy emotions, but move forward. The basis of the research on psychological flexibility is a concept called acceptance and commitment therapy. And basically what that means is that you commit to a future goal or a future state, your future self, and then you accept the emotions that come along the way. You become increasingly adaptive, flexible. You don't let your emotions stop you. You're not rigid. You're flexible. You feel your emotions. You don't ignore them. You're mindful of where you're at, and then you regulate them. You write in your journal. You get an empathetic witness. As Peter Levine says, you talk about what you're going through. So Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways is an amazing one. Tribal Leadership is an absolutely beautiful book. This is a book about organizational culture and how there's multiple stages of cultures. Most people operate in what they call stage 3 culture, which is based on competition. People are competing against each other, and that's where most people get stuck. And actually, Phil Jackson, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls during the Michael Jordan era and the Lakers during the Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal era, really based a lot of his coaching philosophy on this. He even wrote a book called 11 Rings, The Soul of Success, and he based a lot of his theory off of this research in this book by David Logan. What he talked about, Phil Jackson, is he said that for most of his time with the Lakers, they were a stage 3 culture, meaning they were competing against each other. Shaq and Kobe were always trying to figure out who was the top dog, and because they were competing internally, they weren't as good at competing externally. Sometimes they reached a stage 4 culture. Stage 4 culture means that you're finally in pure unity and collaborating internally so that you can focus all your energy on competing externally. Stage 4 cultures always beat stage 3 cultures. When he was talking about his time with the Chicago Bulls and how they won 6 NBA championships, he said that generally they were actually a stage 4 culture. They were very aligned, very collaborative internally. They all were very clear on their roles. They were all supporting each other. It wasn't internal competition trying to go up the ladder. They were on a team. They were collaborative. And so as a result, they could destroy the teams that were having internal strife. So stage 3 cultures are what make up most environments, most families, most businesses, and most identities. Most people are competitive, not collaborative. And so they get stuck. That's what Robert Keegan would call the independent self or the authoring self. They're not at a level where they can collaborate and then ultimately go to the next level. There is a 5th stage, which I really love, and Phil Jackson said that the Bulls did reach that 5th and transcendent stage. And a level 5 culture is where a level 4 collaborative community reaches this stage of just no man's land where they're no longer competing with anyone. It's kind of like Apple when Apple started innovating all sorts of stuff. You have this amazing collaborative group, and it's at the right place and at the right time, and all of a sudden it just transcends everything, and it starts doing things that no one's ever done before. That's what you want to do, is you want to create collaborations and then ultimately reach this sweet spot where you're no longer competing with anybody. Life is just good. You're transforming things. You're transforming the world. You're transforming your industry. You're doing things that can't be replicated. Here's another great book, The Triple Package by Amy Chua. This is a really interesting book. How 3 Unlikely Traits Explain the Rise and Fall of Cultural Groups in America. This just breaks down different groups in America, Jews, Mormons, various types of Indian populations, and how there's 3 traits that a lot of these groups have that ultimately have allowed them to rise radically in the economy. One being impulse control. These groups have a heavy emphasis on controlling your behavior in the present so that you can have better outcomes in the future. Another one is that these groups have a chip on their shoulder for some degree. They've got an inferiority complex because these groups have been marginalized in society. You know, Jews have been pushed down, Mormons have been pushed down, even various Indian groups and even Cuban groups have been, you know, stigmatized with racism and stuff. And so these groups, first off, they have impulse control. Second off, they've got an inferiority complex, meaning they've got a chip on their shoulder. But third off, they actually have a sense of superiority. It's kind of a paradox. They have a sense of superiority because being in that in-group makes them special. So like Jewish people believe they're like the chosen people of God. Mormons believe that they're led by a prophet and that their church is the true church. Indian populations have their own version of like, we're special. And so those 3 traits can lead people to mass success in today's world, and they're the exact opposite of what most of the traits are in America right now. Most people don't have high impulse control in America right now. Most people focus on self-esteem rather than self-control in America. There was actually a huge push during the 90s. It was called the self-esteem era. And America was, the psychology world and even American culture was really pushing towards self-esteem. And interestingly, self-esteem does not translate to high performance, whereas self-control certainly does. And so we have a world now of people who are really infatuated with themselves. They've got high self-esteem, but they have low performance. They've got low impulse control. They're more worried about feeling and looking good in the present and they, to the detriment of their future selves. They also don't have an inferiority complex, and they're not part of an in-group that makes them feel like we're special. Another great book, and all these are unrelated, but The Power of Intention. This is a great book by Dr. Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer was one of the classics when it comes to spiritual and personal development. His work resonates really well with David Hawkins' work and Joe Dispenza's work. That book just kind of teaches you how to control your thoughts, how to control your mind, and ultimately how to use your thoughts to create your outcomes in life. And that ultimately whatever thoughts you're thinking are the things continually producing what you're getting in your life. Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton. This is a profound book talking about how ultimately your biology is shaped by your beliefs. I've already talked about that with Ellen Langer's work. Ellen Langer's work and Bruce Lipton's work is very powerful. And one of the big things that Bruce talks big about is epigenetics, and about how not only does your environment shape your biology, but your perception of that environment shapes your biology. So The Biology of Belief, a winning book. BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits. This is like the masterclass on habits. Core principle, make it as easy as possible to start. That's what creates momentum. So what is the first step you need to take? Optimize for the first step. Make it super easy. Motivation is very easy. Habits are easy to create. They should be easy. If it's hard, you're not going to do it. And so that is the masterclass on how to create habits. So this book is just one of the best books on money I've ever read, Thou Shalt Prosper. It's written by a Jewish rabbi. It just basically breaks down how to be wealthy. It teaches Jewish principles of wealth. That book, Think and Grow Rich, The Richest Man in Babylon, The Millionaire Next Door. There's so many good books on just money principles that if you want to be a millionaire, you just need to learn about the principles of money. Becoming a millionaire is not that difficult a quest. Even Everyday Millionaires is a great book by Chris Hogan. And it's really about how every single person, ordinary people, can become millionaires. One of the simplest principles you need to do is start investing regularly. It's called dollar cost averaging. If you were to create an investment account, even just to the S&P 500, the most basic thing, or get a wealth advisor and apply who not how. But if you begin investing on a weekly basis, even if it's like $50 or $100, you start doing that regularly, compound over time. If you invested $100 a week for the next 20 years, you'd be a millionaire. So if you invest, you're going to make more because all behavior is addictive. And so if you start investing more, you're going to want to invest more. And so as you start putting more and more into your investments, your identity is going to grow. Your future self is going to grow. And as your view of your future grows, your behavior in the present grows. Dan Sullivan has said that your view of the future shapes your present. Or he actually said that the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. In psychology, and this goes back to Daniel Gilbert, who I referenced earlier, prospection is the idea that whatever view you have of your future, that's the thing driving your present. Again, that's why your goals shape your identity. Your goals shapes your identity shapes your behavior, and your behavior over time becomes your personality. That's why you should not have a fixed mindset and think that who you are right now and your current personality is the be-all, end-all. Don't base your goals on your personality. Base your identity on your goals. Your goals are your future self. Your goals are the things you want. Your goals are the future you want. And imagination is more important than knowledge. And so decide the future you want, because whatever view you have of the future, that's the thing driving your present. And so then base your identity on your desired future self. Tell people about your future self. Begin investing money into your future self. And then as you do more and more of that, your future self will grow, your confidence will grow, your courage will grow. It's quite amazing. This is the last book I'm just going to share in this video, and this is The Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler. This is just the best, most compelling, exciting book on flow and high performance. It's based on all the research on flow. And it's just a very fun read to show you how to get into a flow state more often. Hopefully this big Mondo list of books was helpful. And if you have any book recommendations, please put them down in the chat box, or please comment and please put your favorite books. I'm currently reading an enormous amount of books. There's so many that I could have listed here, but I just wanted to share a few of the classics. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Please watch the next video to help you become your desired future self. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. Also down below, there's a link to capture the peak state checklist, which over 800,000 people have downloaded, and it will help you get into a peak state every single day. Have an amazing day. See ya.